Hi, welcome to our Communities at Grace leadership training. This is the 6th of 7 videos. So as we've walked through some of these different topics, we walked through confiding and through praying, and through helping. We've talked about applying scripture together. All of those are kind of the within the group kind of stuff, but these next two there's a shift now. We're gonna talk about things outside of your group. We're going to get into some of this bigger picture of what your group's about. So tonight, I want to talk to you to this one about inviting. Inviting might be a bit of a misnomer, and that we're really getting into is building relationships outside of your group and developing a certain kind of mindset. But we'll get to that in more detail in a minute. So to start, I want you to think about how you first joined a small group. Not the one you started, but when did you first experience community? When did you first get involved in a church? That might have been here, might have been another church in another town, another time. But when you first got involved in community, you first did that. Did someone invite you? Did you sign up at a small group event? Did you know someone in the group? Did you not? In my experience, I would expect if you're thinking about kind of your first experience with it, not many of you took your own initiative to go sign up and join a group on your own. On some level, most people join a group because they already know somebody in that group and they're personally invited in some way. And that's certainly true at our church most of the time. There's some who take the initiative that will go and sign up, but most of us need a little nudge the first time, especially if we've never done it before. So if it's nerve-wracking to you to meet new people, imagine somebody trying to go to a group and go to somebody's home, and then all these people who know each other are eating over this person's home. It's very personal, and I'm going to walk in and not know anybody. That is hard to do, and it's hard to even picture doing that sometimes for people on a Sunday morning, to just go and sign on a random, what seems like a random list and pick a group of people they don't know. And then so the idea of that is very stress inducing. So it takes somebody who's pretty extroverted, courageous to start it, or really just knows the value of small groups to do that. So once people have a taste for it and they said, hey, I know how badly I need that community, so I'll go do it anyway, even though it's nerve-wracking at first. But for the people who were trying to gather into community, a lot of them, they kind of want it, but it's scary to think about when they don't know anybody. So as a leader, as a person who's tasked with developing this aspect of your group, you're going to want to help your group be a place that welcomes new people in, that minimizes the awkwardness of that transition. And the church tries to help with some of those processes, but those can still feel very impersonal when the church is doing it broadly with a big number of people. So the real key for you guys in your group is building relationships inside and outside the church where there's a real knowing of people. So to illustrate that, I want to look at a couple examples from the Apostle Paul. So Paul and his companions are called in a vision to go to Macedonia. This is modern day Greece. And it's a totally non-Jewish area. He arrives, he crosses into this region, he settles into one of the largest cities, Philippi. There isn't even a synagogue, so that takes away his kind of normal method of how he does things. So Paul is totally new here, doesn't know anybody, so we see what he does in Acts 16, verses 13 to 15. It says, on the Sabbath day, we went outside to get to a riverside where we were supposing that there would be a place of prayer, and we sat down and began speaking to the women who had assembled. A woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple fabrics, a worshiper of God, was listening, and the Lord opened her heart to respond to the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged us, saying, if you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. Now, Paul's situation is a little different than yours because he was new to town. He didn't have a home to invite someone into. He didn't have a smart of his house. He had a group of people that had come with him, a few guys that were traveling with him, but pay attention to how he approached Lydia and the others. So he sought out a place where he knew people would be worshiping more. He knew there might be people worshiping or praying. If there's not a synagogue, he knew that would be a normal pattern down by the rivers where he'd expect some people to be worshiping that might be receptive. So coming in there, he approached them, he sat down with them, and he engaged them in conversation. He got to know them a little bit. And so in that conversation, as that went on, we don't know totally, what all they were talking about, but as it talked about spiritual things somewhere in there, there was a point that Lydia's heart was opened and she responded to the things Paul was saying, and she urged them to go deeper in the relationship. So think of this as a way of approaching when you get to a worship service, when you come here on a Sunday morning, you come here knowing this is where people come to worship. This is where people come to pray. But many of the people on a Sunday morning, when you come here for a worship service, there's many people in there that are not engaged in community the way we would think of it. A lot of them are not connected. A lot of them aren't in a small group, aren't going to a Bible study. A lot of them come on a Sunday morning, and that's the first contact we have with them. And so I would encourage, so just like he did, take notice of who's there, go and sit with them and engage in conversation. So if you consistently do this, you're going to notice there are some people, just like Lydia, who God will prompt to respond, and they will be eager for community. And so take those opportunities. You invite them to your group, just like Paul did. Invite them out to coffee, invite them out to lunch, whichever seems more comfortable. It's just all about inviting them to your small group. But it's taking the opportunity that when you come into a worship service, just like Paul, you're intentionally looking, who's out there, who's worshiping, who's here that it's sitting by themselves or something, right? Like, I'm going to look for that. So you see that Paul's approach to a kind of a worship type situation. But what about a more mundane work or living situation? What about your unbelieving coworker? And when Paul arrived in Corinth, he was totally out of sorts. So after some time in Philippi, he had gone through different parts of Greece. He had been chased out due to persecution. And after he left Athens, he kind of settled in Corinth was the place he settled for a while. So he didn't go there by some kind of plan. Nobody knew he was coming. He didn't have anything. He shows up there just getting away from the people who were trying to arrest him or kill him. So when he lands there in Corinth, he's having to improvise. This was not where he planned to minister. This was a pagan area. He'd been chased there by persecution. So basically, he fled here to find safety, and then he just kind of needed to settle in. So let's look at Acts 18, starting in verse 1. After these things, he left Athens and he went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. He came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them. And they were working by trade, they were tent makers. So here's Paul out of desperation landing in Corinth. And then he needs two things. Immediately, he needs a place to stay, and he needs a way to make money because he's going to have to eat, right? So his just basic needs are the first thing. He's got to get himself established. So he happens upon somebody, finds this guy that's of the same trade, Aquila, who also is a tent maker as Paul was. And he happens to also be a Jew displaced from Rome. So he's familiar with persecution. So it isn't just any random connection. When Priscilla and Aquila, though, become the main people who build the church in Ephesus, a place Paul previously wanted to visit. If you remember earlier in Acts, if you're familiar with Acts, there's this point where there's this weird statement about Paul was forbidden to spread the word in Asia. And so then shortly after that, he has this vision to go to Macedonia. That Asia, Ephesus, is where he was forbidden to go. That's that region that he was not allowed to go to. Well, when he gets down to Corinth, he meets Priscilla and Aquila. They become his partners who actually help build that church. So this is part of what God was doing, was saying, you need to meet these people first. So this was a really divine appointment, but it starts with a basic needs that he needed to have met. So it's his kind of work, his neighborhood, those kinds of needs being met as he got there. Priscilla and Aquila also, by the way, helped Apollos, who became a key minister. They were the ones that trained him to come and minister to the people here in Corinth. So this was a really, really critical meeting. And Paul's practical needs were met, but then there was a parallel path at work too. God was using this situation supernaturally to lead him to key partners in the work. And there's a good chance with Priscilla and Aquila that they weren't even believers when they met Paul, right? So these were Jews that had been chased out of Rome. Good chance coming from there that they didn't know anything about Jesus. So Paul is meeting with them. He is sharing the gospel with them. And then he ends up working alongside of them for a year and a half before taking them with him and dropping them off in Ephesus. So this was a long-term relationship that started out of just basic necessity. It became a critical partnership in the gospel. But Paul's eyes had to be open to that. And that was the thing that Paul, all along the way, even when he's just meeting his basic needs that he needs to meet, he paid attention to those divine appointments and built those relationships. So there are two ideas that I think we need to take from this and we need to apply to our groups when we're thinking about this. First, we need to always have our eyes open for divine appointments. So this is anytime. This is when you're in the line at Walmart. This is when you're at work and you get to know somebody and somebody shares a need with you. This could be a neighbor that you get to talk to out on the lawn. Even when they're very casual conversations, to always be watching for if the Holy Spirit's prompting you to get to know this person or take advantage of this situation. Ask them about this. Serve them in some way, whatever it may be. Some come from our faithful intentionality in the worship environment. It comes from when you come on Sunday morning, instead of just focusing on your own worship, resist the urge to tune everyone else out and focus purely on your own learning, your own worshiping. It's great to get something from that, but intentionally look around as well to see the others that are there. Do you see someone new? Do you see someone sitting by themselves? Do you see someone that seems emotional, that's crying? Or do you go into worship prayerfully and intentionally asking God for someone to meet? And to be willing to go up, as Paul did with Lydia, go sit down and have a conversation with them. I think the best conversations that happen, the best relationships that build out of that worship service happen that way. Someone goes up and just sits next to somebody and gets to know them a little bit. So, but don't discount the spiritual value of relationships that develop as you're working, as you're getting involved in activities during the week, as you're talking to your neighbors or whatever it is. God is at work, even in the most mundane conversations. And so don't miss an opportunity to meet someone that God has led your way, right? And build that relationship. So second, first, having your eyes open for those divine appointments, but also be willing to build long-term relationships with people. So particularly with the unbelievers, the hurting people in your community out there, don't compartmentalize your relationships. If you have a kinship with someone at work, build that friendship genuinely and intentionally, and not just always looking for a chance to share the gospel with that person, but build the relationship, build a friendship, get to know them personally, get to know about their family, get to know those things. So you never know when God is going to put you there at a critical time in someone's life. And that trust is built as they see that you're genuinely interested in them as a person. As you build a trust, you build things in common. And that takes a while. Pray for that person, build that relationship on purpose. And as a group, one of the things you're doing is to join with each other in prayer and celebrate as you do it. So most of this has to do with how we should act outside of the small group meeting, honestly. But what does this mean for our time together? How do we build this culture in and put it into practice in a small group setting? So we want to encourage each other in it. And so the group meeting, the time that you meet each week, is a good time to check in on your activity during the week. What are you doing? Who are you meeting? Who are you praying for? And if you want this to be a consistent part of each other's lives, you need to consistently talk about it. So each week, make it a point to check in on these relationships. So this sets the norm for everyone, that this is what a Christian does. It keeps you intentional. So when you pray each week for a person that you work with or who you talk to, or you talk about how you're meeting someone during worship and I want to, they're new to town and I want to welcome into town and whatever, there's a natural accountability. You've shared that with your group. Now that pushes you like, okay, I need to go call that person. I said I would, or I need to make sure I do this for that person like I said I was going to. And you're going to just be more aware. You're going to have eyes to see that next opportunity, and you're going to be expecting God to work because you've been talking about it with your group. So in application, we do have a tool that you can use in these conversations, particularly the harder ones, like the non-Christian conversations that you're having. Sometimes very simply on a Sunday morning, you meet somebody. You're either kind of inviting them to coffee or something like that if you get to know them a little bit, or you're inviting them to small group because they don't have community. So often those are fairly simple, and they can get. You might be praying for somebody if they share a need or something like that. But really, sometimes it's just as simple as a friendly face. It's another person that said hi to me today that I got to know, a familiar face now on Sunday morning. If they may say, oh yeah, I've been coming here for 12 years and I'm already in a small group. And so like, then that's good. You just have a familiar face now you can talk to. But often there's pretty simple applications to the worship scenario because people are coming there for a purpose. And so it's just the willingness to go out there and talk to that person, get to know them, and invite them if it's appropriate. But especially when you're talking about your non-Christian friends or your coworkers or people like that out in the community, you get to know a neighbor. We have this tool called the Conversation Quadrant that is just a simple representation for how relationships deepen and move toward Christ. So often we have to build a closer relationship with someone before they're ready to trust you and coming to church, coming to your small group, wanting to read the Bible with you or have those kind of deeper conversations. So whether it's fast or whether it's slow, friendships generally will develop on a spiritual level from the casual being the first part, like how's the weather? Did you see the game last night? You may talk about football, whatever. That's the casual level. Then they develop to a meaningful level. So after a little while, somebody shares with you something more meaningful in their life. Like, my wife and I are really struggling. Can I tell you something? My mom is in the hospital and I'm really worried about her, right? That kind of thing is like, oh, okay, right? Like we've moved. Now we're not just talking sports or weather. Now we're talking about real life stuff. And then it progresses from that casual to the meaningful and into the spiritual. So, what does your church say about divorce? Or they might say, would you be willing to pray for me about this? Like my mom's in the hospital. Like, would you be, you're a praying person, right? Would you pray for this, right? Or they might have basic spiritual conversations that it may not be asking about the gospel, something like that, but there's some level of spiritual content. They may just say something about, well, you know what I believe, kind of thing. Sometimes you get those kind of comments, but we're moving from the meaningful. Now we're talking about spiritual things, and we've opened that door. And then that final thing, you go from casual to meaningful to spiritual, and then it's discovery. So now this person is interested, engaged, and they're curious, and they're asking questions. And that's when that sign, the Holy Spirit's really drawing this person, and you see it. So you seem, they might say, oh, you seem to have this like really supportive group of friends that do that. Like how I need someone like that. How does that community work? Or you seem to have so much peace in your life. Why is that? Or, like, what does the Bible say about this? And they're curious, and you sense like now they want to know. So not all of these are people you would invite into your group. So when you're talking about a non-Christian, you're talking about a coworker, a neighbor, the next move may not be inviting them to your small group. If they need that community and they're asking, that's a great place. Some people are more comfortable in the small group scenario than they are in a big church on a Sunday morning, especially if they've been kind of burned by a church experience in the past. But so it might be that you welcome them in to meet your friends, but it might also be, hey, I'll come over to your house and we'll study the scriptures together, or let's go to lunch, at work, in the context that we normally meet. And, let's go to lunch and, we can talk about these things together. Let's read the Bible together. Let's see what it says, right? This discovery phase might mean, doing that. Either way, the group becomes a support for you as you're an ambassador for Christ in your community. So we have a link. There's a button for you can download a copy. This is a very simple little grid. This conversation quadrant just shows those 4 things. And you just keep track of how someone progresses through those 4 areas from casual to meaningful to spiritual to discovery. And so you fill this out. This is one of the things you can bring to your group. You can fill this out every single week and just watch how people progress, to just ask, okay, who do you know? Is there somebody that you've met that you're praying for, that you're trying to talk to, or that needs community? So it might be a person at church that you talk to that this person, they're new to town. I'm going to try to follow up with them. I want to make sure they feel welcome and I want to invite them to our group. You'd write that person in there. But especially too, the long-term ones often are especially those ones, a neighbor, a coworker, someone that plays the same kids in the same sport as your kids, things like that, to say, hey, this guy, John, that I work with, like we share a lot in common. We end up talking a lot. We end up working on the same projects a lot. We get along really well. So he's, a non-Christian guy, and I really want to kind of be there for him. Right now, it's just in a casual level. So let's write his name in that casual box and let's pray for him. And we're just praying for an opportunity to move that to a more meaningful conversation as a group. Right? So as a group, we all know John's name and we're praying that moves forward. And then when you say, guess what? John came to me today and he was like, hey, you know what? There's some things going on in my life that I'm really distressed about. And could I talk to you about it? Right? Could we talk about something serious? And you'd be like, wow, answered prayer. Like God just opened a door for this meaningful conversation. Right? So now we start praying for it to be a spiritual conversation. Right? As we touch base with this tool each week in the small group meeting, there's a built-in kind of encouragement and accountability that's happening, that we're all ambassadors out in the community. And now we check back in on it. And this becomes the norm. This is what we're expecting to happen, because this is what God does, right? Like he's introducing us to people. He's creating opportunities, and we start to watch for it. So we celebrate as people move to the next level. And as the leader of this part, I would say the other thing that's important for you, if you're doing this conversation quadrant every week, which I think is really useful, it's good to review the previous weeks before each meeting, so you can remember to ask about them. Like, hey, you were talking about these 3 guys at work that are in the kind of meaningful category that you've got to know pretty well. Like, have you had any conversations with them this week? Because sometimes people forget and they won't even think to bring it up because it doesn't seem that important. They say, oh, you know what? He did share this with me this week. Oh, I forgot about that. Let's pray about that, right? Use this time to remind yourself to check in on it. And you being ahead of the game and being aware of which people we're looking at, talking about, praying for, the people that we invited to our group, how did they respond, and fill out. So I would say take this right now. So if this is new to you and you haven't done this before, I would say download the conversation quadrant. Out of this, you'll see the button here on the page, and download it and do it for yourself as a practice round. And see where you would put certain people that you know. What relationships are you building? Believers, unbelievers, where would you put them? This is where you get to be part of the bigger picture, what God is doing, right? Like you get to see how he is working in people's hearts. And sometimes you don't even know it, and you walk right into some conversation. You're like, oh, the thing I've been praying about, he just dropped it on my doorstep, right? It's really exciting to be a part of that. So take the opportunity to discipline yourself to do this as a group and to start talking about it, because you're going to see God work. And now your group is not just a support group for each other, encouraging each other, but now we're starting to see God work in people's lives out there. I have an unbelieving friend that's moving closer to Jesus now because of the thing we've been doing and praying for it, right? Like that's exciting to be a part of. So this is super essential to the life of your group and the bigger picture purpose. So as we go, we got one more video left. So the next time we're going to talk about the other part of the big picture of how God launches people into their calling. I'm excited to get into it. So until next time, see you.